is feeding us. What are we eating? So we take a look at the next words. Maybe we can get an answer from the daughters of Moab. And the word is Benut Moav. In the word for daughters, we have a word Benut that finds its root in Bana, that means to build, establish, and restore. This word is a feminine word as opposed to Ben, which is a masculine. So this gives us an idea that what we're going to consider when we think about female things in Torah, it's usually pointing to the spiritual nature of something. And when we look at things from a male point of view, it's usually talking to us about the worship point of view. So what we're looking at here is something that is going to affect the spiritual nature of things. We also have to take into account the Proto-Hebrew of this word, which means continuance of the house. And if we look at this word for Benut in Proto-Hebrew, it's simply the Beit, which is house. And again, we have the Nun, which is a seed, which talks about continuance. So we have one word that means to cut off the seed, and one that means to continue the seed. Can both of those together cause us a problem? How do you cut off a seed and continue a seed at the same time? So we're going to consider that here in the next verse or two. So keeping that idea in mind, we recall that our word El, that meant to as well as toward, into, against, and between, we consider that if it means to go into something, then we can consider that what is being taken in, what is being eaten, in other words, is somehow spiritual, and that is believed will help restore and build us up without realizing that it is from Moab. Moab. We say Moab. This name was given to the son of Lot's eldest daughter. This son, Moab, was conceived after the eldest daughter made her father Lot drunk, and when he passed out, she got in bed with him. And the result was a child named Moab. This is incest, but it's a representation of a coming idolatry. So if we consider this to be a spiritual idea, Moab means from her father. So if we say a continuance of the house of incest, means an idolatrous spirit. So seeking restoration in our own emotions or in a teaching or belief that is contrary to Torah, which is Yahweh's instructions, is a form of idolatry. And to trust in it, rather than to trust in the restoration, redemption, and deliverance of Yahweh, who is Yeshua, is to break the first three commandments. Okay?
Wow.
Okay.
Whoa.
So,
Go back and repeat that.
okay. If we are seeking restoration in our own emotions or in a teaching or belief contrary to Torah, Yahweh's instruction, it is a form of idolatry. And to trust in it rather than to trust in the restoration, redemption, and deliverance of Yahweh Elohim, who is Yeshua, is to break the first three commandments. We could say, why? Why can you say that? Because our emotions can become an Elohim, and we can place our emotions in the place of Elohim. Trust in our emotions to deliver us from bondage. We can create our emotions, that we've created something that has taken the place of Elohim. And if we don't call on the name of Yahweh, we trust in our own emotions, we break the third commandment, and that we bring his name to nothing. And it's the same thing with a false doctrine. We have a doctrine that we've trusted in and held on to all these years, and we come to the realization that it's just not so. but we insist on keeping that doctrine, then we are replacing Elohim. We're replacing His word. We're depending on something created, so we're breaking the second commandment, and again, we are discarding His name with this doctrine. So this is why it's so very important, and I stress it often, that nobody can study for you. All I can do, all preacher, pastor, rabbi, televangelist, best-selling author, all they can do is provide you with information. Ultimately, it's up to each of us as individuals to go back and read through it and say, okay, this is good, or say, that was a bunch of hogwash, it was a bunch of bunk. And if it's hogwash and a bunch of bunk, and I've taught it to you, then I would have expected out of love for you to come and say, Michael, this is a bunch of hogwash, it's a bunch of bunk, it doesn't line up with Torah, you misrepresented it. And then I'll look at it and say, wow, you're right. Or I'll say, but did you consider this letter way over here that ties everything together? So, but we have a responsibility as individuals to study everything that we're taught. But we also have a responsibility as individuals to keep our emotions in check by seeking Elohim when we get bent out of shape, and we do get bent out of shape. It happens. That's part of living in these earth suits. Okay? Is everybody with me so far?
Yes.
Good. Verse 2. And they call the people unto the sacrifices of their deities, and the people did eat and bowed down to their deities. And I find it interesting that it says that the people did eat, and we've just talked about what are you eating. They took in this false doctrine. They took in this falsehood, or if we were to apply it to our emotional state, we took in what our emotional state is feeding us as opposed to what the Word of Elohim tells us. So if we consider what we've just discussed, then verse 2 should almost be self-explanatory. Keeping to false doctrine is no different than going after foreign deities. Yielding to our emotions without seeking Yahweh Elohim is also on the same level as seeking other deities and bowing before them. So as stated above, this separates us, and it's important, this separates us from Elohim, which brings us to verse 3, which is our final verse of this study. And verse 3 says, and Israel joined himself unto Baal of Peor, and the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel. The important part of our focus for this particular phrase is that Israel joined himself unto Baal of Peor. It's not really in the notes, but when we consider himself, now we're looking at our physical worship taking us in a different direction, and we'll consider that in a second. But in the first phrase of this verse, we can reaffirm what we've just considered. It says, and Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor. Now we said that all this stuff can separate us from Elohim. It can cause a division. It can cause a gap. So if we're considering the negative side of Israel, which is wrestling or fighting against Elohim, we add this to the word for joined, which is samed, that actually means to be bound to, then we can say that to wrestle with Elohim binds us to something. And that something is Baal Peor. Lebaal Peor, meaning master of the gap, master of separation, master of the division. Who is it that seeks to divide us from the instruction of Yahweh Elohim? If we consider that Satan means adversary and devil means liar, then we can consider that it is the Satan that we are actually bowing down to when we allow ourselves to be separated from Yahweh Elohim by our unstable emotions or by our keeping to false teachings that we actually know go contrary to the instruction of Yahweh Elohim. So consider the words, just to reaffirm what we've just said, just consider the words found in Lebaal Peor. In Lebaal, or Lebaal, this is in Baal, we'll notice that we have two lamets. Okay? We can say that one of them is instruction, and one of them is learning from the instruction. But in the middle, there's something that separates them. Beit means house, but Beit also means to divide. Ayin again means perception. Our perception of what we are shown, what we are taught, what we learn, our perception of the instruction of Elohim. If we are in a state of separation, the instruction can actually divide us from our ability to learn. We can read it all we want. People can teach it to us until they're green in the face. But if we're emotionally compromised, or if we are stuck in a doctrine, and we're not going to let go of this doctrine, even though we can clearly see in Torah that it says this just isn't true, then we will not learn anything from the instruction. Baal means master. Okay? Who is our master? If we are being deceived, if we are being basically adversarial towards the truth of our Elohim, our master becomes the Satan. Now, in the word Peor, again, we have the pei that means mouth, but it also represents word. It also means communication. And if we consider it to be the word and the communication that comes from Yahweh Elohim, the resh being authority. So if we consider that the word and the communication that comes from Elohim is authority, that something, again, in the middle separates us from being able to hear and actually do according to the word of Elohim. And what separates us here is, here's the vav that represents what? Flesh. Flesh. Perception. Our perception of the flesh. What is our perception of the flesh? What our emotions are telling us. And if we yield to what the flesh is telling us, as opposed to yielding to what the instruction of Elohim is telling us, then what are we doing? We're again separated or divided away from his authority because we don't want to yield to his authority. So this first part of Pinchas is showing us what, not only showing us what happened in Balak and Balaam's plan to draw the children of Israel away from Elohim, which we've seen that what it can do to us as well in this story. And underneath, we understand that doctrinal walls can keep us outside the tent, can keep us separated from our Elohim. But our emotional self, if we don't allow the gold to cover the shittim wood in the ark of the Mishkan represents our heart. And if we don't allow the gold to cover it, then the Shekinah can't fall and sit between the two cherubim. Okay? So, in this study, it takes us back to the same question that we ask over and over and over. Where are you? Because this is, I think, what, as humankind, what we're trying to answer. As Elohim asked Adam after the transgression, he asked, where are you? And Adam, from our reading of Bereshit on the surface, we find out that he didn't really give a very good answer, because here we are. So, any questions on Pinchas part 1?
I really would like to know, how do you become emotionless?
It's not about becoming emotionless. It's about keeping the emotions in check. What emotions do we keep in check? Well, we say love is a good emotion. But we can say how many really bad decisions have been made out of love. We say anger is a bad emotion. But how many good decisions have we made because we were angry? The thing is, we have to have anger. If we didn't have anger, if we didn't have jealousy, if we didn't have these negative emotions, then we would basically cower in the corner and not be able to compete. Now, when I say compete, I'm not talking about I'm better than you and I'm going to prove that I'm better than you. Compete means simply showing up at the grocery store and having the gumption to go and pick up an apple and put it in the bag. Believe me, it's competition. We're competing to survive in the smallest ways, the smallest things that we don't recognize are competition, that allow us to be aggressive enough to say hello to somebody. We have to have aggression in order to be able to go up and show love. So emotions on that sense are one thing. But when we become so infatuated with something that I'm so in love, I'm so in love, I'm so in love, that we forget Elohim, then what are we working on? We're working on, oh, my heart tells me it's the right thing to do. What does Elohim say about the heart? The first time that he mentions the heart of humankind is in Bereshit, when he's talking to Noah. He's saying the imagination of the heart of humankind is evil from its youth. When he's talking to Jeremiah, he says the heart of humankind is deceptive and weak. Who can know it? Elohim knows the heart. Why do we need to seek Elohim in the midst of our emotions? When we become so angry that everything is shut off, all we see is red and the smoke coming out of the ears, and or we become so depressed that we give up because I don't feel like praying, I don't feel like anything, or I'm so mad that I'm going to just go straight to guns and I'm not going to stop. I have to have emotion to survive. I have to show my wife love. I have to show my neighbors that I love them. I have to be able to show, and this is true, I have to be able to show my grandchildren anger so that they'll know not to do things that can hurt them. But when somebody steps on my toes, or somebody goes out of their way to try to upset me, then I have to be able to turn it off and turn it over to Elohim before I go to firing my cannons. It's not about being emotionless. It's about
how we make our decisions.
It's about being able to balance emotion and allow Elohim to cover the emotion with his glory.
I think one of the perfect examples that comes to my mind as we're talking about that is we hear continuously, I was led to, and I feel convicted, or I'm inspired. And there is inspiration in the Holy, the Spirit, His Spirit, right? But the biggest confusion there is being able to filter out our own, our own addictions, our own rescuer, enabler, whatever, or angry person, or whichever type of temperament and personality, right? and it's subjecting that to a higher standard. There's Amos and the plumb line, and what do you use for your standard? What do you judge it against? You know,
Right.
does it line up